Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited for this week's episode of On Chain On Air. I have two guests with me. I've got Rob and Jonathan, and I'm really excited to share with our listeners what you've been working on and how blockchain can support thriving communities. So let's go with a little round of introductions. Rob, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Rob Lloyd. I'm the Deputy City Manager for Transportation, Aviation, and Technology for the City of San Jose. We're the 10th largest city in the country, at least still. I think Austin might catch us soon. And the home of Silicon Valley and about 70,000 of the world's best businesses. Been in public sector my entire career by choice. So been a CIO, utility director, chief information security officer. And one of the things that we've always tried to do on the teams I've been a part of in the cities is try to serve our communities better. And the dynamics of post-COVID life and community and economic recovery have a lot of space in them for creating opportunity through new technologies and ways to access data, finance, and other things. Really glad to be here also with Jonathan. We're actually friends.
It's a great segue. Jonathan, let's hear a little bit about yourself.
Great. Yeah, it's lovely to be on with Rob. Good to see you again, my good friend. I am a technology guy for most of my career, about 30 years in technology and in business leadership. I also worked in a city. I was the chief information officer for the city of Palo Alto. And a few years ago, I left that to start my own business, a little boutique advisory firm here in Silicon Valley called Human Future. And I advise governments about technology and now a lot of organizations, even in the private sector. But my real passion is education. And I'm a professor at the University of San Francisco, Menlo College, and I do a little bit of work with the School of Public Policy at Pepperdine University. And some people will know me for my work on LinkedIn Learning. I have quite a lot of popular videos that have been watched by well over 1 million people. And now I'm an author, so I've just released my 6th book, which we'll talk about today, I think, on crypto and blockchain. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. I'm really excited to have you both here. On a personal note, I have a graduate degree in public administration with focuses on state and local government and nonprofit management. So I really love talking to people who work in the field, and I'm also a former educator. So a lot of alignment in our interests today. So I'm looking forward to this conversation very much.
We got the vibe that you were cool. Now we know why.
That's why, because public service is a noble calling, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So I'd like to hear from each of you kind of, what your introduction to blockchain was, what your maybe initial thoughts were, and how your interest in Web3 has evolved to where it is today. Jonathan, if you want to kick us off, you can.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I was a little late to the game. The Bitcoin paper gets released in 2008. Bitcoin starts in 2009, but I don't really get on the train until probably 2014, 2015. I could see it all happening, and I was getting invitations to conferences and stuff. I have to say, I had no idea what blockchain was, but I was at a dinner after an event in Austria, of all places, beautiful country. And there was a speaker, after dinner speaker. I think she was the executive director of the Blockchain Association of Germany, if my memory serves me right. And I'm having dessert and I'm listening to the speaker, and I was chatting with people at my table. But she started to talk, and immediately I was drawn in. And the more she spoke about it, the more I sort of began to get it. She was a great speaker, of course. And I was like, this is really interesting. I honestly had no idea. And it was the start of my sort of journey, I guess, at that point. And started getting, I said, I have to learn more about this. I started to learn more and more. And then, being an instructor with LinkedIn Learning, doing online videos, I kind of looked at their catalog, and they at that time, they hadn't got anything on their catalog around blockchain at all. And so I said to my producer, how about we do a course to introduce blockchain to beginners? And so we did that, and it was a big hit. And then we did it. They said, you got to do a follow-up. You got to do a more advanced course. So I did blockchain beyond the basics. Ended up doing several courses around NFTs and securing cryptos. And how cryptos work and how blockchain works. And today, well over 1 million people have watched just those videos alone. And then I started. I was asked to write a book, and I've recently released a cryptocurrency quick start guide. But I look at blockchain and through the lens of different industries. Of course, I'm very passionate about cities and the future of public service and government services in general. So that's been an area of interest. I've helped governments think about what they might do with it and experiment and even reduce the risk of crypto and the crypto economy. And now I teach it at university, teach some courses. So I'm pretty deep in the space. It's among a lot of things I'm interested in. So I think it's one of the most compelling and fascinating areas of emerging technology, full of risk, but full of promise. And we'll probably go there. You can see I'm tackling the issue and learning about it myself and championing it in many different forums.
I'll go next, I guess. So I think I come at it from a parallel lane to Jonathan, which is for us how it solves community problems. And so I bought my first 3 Bitcoin at about 2010. And that was a fun experience, but all my other purchases basically are worthless, or haven't improved as much. I shouldn't say worthless. But on the community building side, the promise of distributed ledger and blockchain overall is what it opens up and the barriers that it reduces. And we always pay attention to those because every big shift in technology has been some kind of thrust that simplified what was previously complex, right? So PCs from mainframes, mobile devices, your browser, the smartphones, what they took and made easy to access and to amass users on. And so there was a couple areas where we said, this thing has promise, but we also are going to be guarded about how we dive into these types of technologies because government always works first from a position of trust. You have to trust that the government services are going to work, they're going to be reliable, they're going to be fair. Otherwise, the technology erodes that, and you get something from a range of fiasco to something that just doesn't work and doesn't get adopted. So for us, we said, we really see promise, and this was 2017-ish. We said, we see promise in a couple areas. One is decentralized finance. We have a serious unbanked, underbanked problem for both our residents and even some of our businesses. Maybe this could go there. We've got some kind of incentivization engine where you could distribute tokens based on some kind of public good. And we identified things like connectivity, community connectivity as one potential thrust there. And we ended up having a partnership in that vein. And then we also said that as this integrates into the mass of major applications and providers that we have, then it starts opening the doors to more and more where we can look at smart contracts. And you pay attention to layer 2 because it's trying to focus on where the basics aren't working quite well enough. And so what can you accelerate? What can you make easy? What can you amass users for? What can you create a community for? And then the last thing we said is we do want to see that community of use and passion arise, because when you see that establish itself and work its way stronger and stronger over time, then you really see certain technologies thrive, like Linux in one example. And then if you don't see that community emerge, you see niche solutions that tend to wither on the vine over time. And we have to make smart decisions and make sure that we protect people. But ultimately, actually, just that position of trust, maintenance that we have, we want to go in the ways that it really helps our community while keeping that trust factor high.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really interested in applications for government use, but also, ones that would increase that civic trust. And I think blockchain and distributed ledgers in general could really offer some potential for increased transparency. But so much of that benefit really relies on education and people understanding the why and the how. So I'll throw it over to Jonathan and see what you might have to add on.
Yeah, well, I at heart, I'm an educator, so I think that people need to check out some of my materials. Cryptocurrency quick start guide here, just released it on Amazon and other platforms. So yeah, well, look, it was obviously a little bit of a plug there, of course, but I'm making the bigger point to support you, which is when you do the research on where we're at with, particularly with blockchain as a mechanism for adding value to organizations in all sorts of ways, we see a big gap in the education part. People don't even know how to think about it, like what its role could be. They may get, and they do actually. The evidence does show this, that leaders do compound crypto with blockchain, and if crypto gets a bad story, which has been the case over the last few months, that immediately creates a bad story for blockchain and people's perceptions. And we have to be really clear: these are two separate items. Blockchain is the technology, the platform. Crypto is an application that runs on top of blockchain. So there's a lot to be done in that area. People, if they knew more about it, what it was capable of, they might consider it in their architectural choices when they're building solutions. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's got to solve a problem, right? And if an existing technology does it just as well, well, then it might not be the first choice. So I think my advice to a lot of leaders.
Let me ask you a question on that one, because we've had an aversion to talking about crypto, and you don't see me use that word very often because it takes people down a wrong road. And I'm just piecing together, based on your comments, maybe why we've done that, maybe without thinking. But we're really talking about foundational pieces and community of practice to be able to build with it, sustain it over time. Is it aversion, or do you think we do have to teach people about what crypto is too? Or do we stay focused on kind of the foundational technologies, the problem solving and the uses, and then crypto is a separate conversation?
I think so. I think that it's possible to talk entirely about blockchain and its technical advantages to support solutions and create innovation without getting it confused with cryptocurrency as a digital money, right? Now, on the back end, if you get into the weeds a little bit, of course, you have the token economy, which kind of powers a lot of what's going on. Most leaders don't need to know that, and it'll come up within the technical audience, of course. But I do think that just explaining that crypto is an application, a monetary application of blockchain, and blockchain itself is a distributed ledger that has all sorts of capabilities. That alone, I think, is going to help people in their perception. And even though we're in 2023, and you think, aren't we beyond that? Not in the data. The surveys and that I read and the research I do shows that we're still not beyond that point.
And I want to take that maybe 2 points further. And you and I know in the community, some people really some cities even leaned heavily into like the city coins and things like that. And we were like, we really think that's the wrong direction. That's kind of an artifact of good solutions, but don't make it about that city coin. And even had a couple mayors who said, I'll take my pay in some kind of currency. Do you think that caused more harm than good? Because I'll be honest with you, I think it might have.
That's interesting. Well, you're probably in a very good position to have an important viewpoint on that, given your leadership position in a big city. I think that it is important to experiment. Look, and we need leaders who are prepared to take risks, and even when things are people saying don't do it. Progress only happens when people are prepared to take those kind of leaps. So in a way, if it hasn't worked out and the jury's still out on city coins, we learned, as Einstein said, there's no failures. It's like we just learned how not to do something, right? Or that could have been Thomas Edison, one or the other. I think it was Thomas Edison, actually. I think so. I failed 1,000 times. I didn't fail 1,000 times. I just found out, lots of ways that I shouldn't do something. So by doing city coins, we actually learned a lot. We had to do it, and perhaps there's a flavor of it that will make sense. But to kind of build on this a little bit, so it's a great example. You bring up this idea of city coins. Okay, it's a way of using a crypto to raise money to invest in city projects, and it clearly ties crypto into the local city ecosystem. But then you look at something like identity management, and you realize this is so important in a city context, right? we've got so many systems that people have to log into. They have to authenticate all the time. And, identity and access management is it's made progress, but it's still a messy area. Anyone who's dealt with systems knows they probably have more than one login name. Let's be fair, right? And so then you say, okay, how do we solve this in the long term? How do we get to a place not only where we have much more seamless identity management, but it's much more secure? So, for example, we can get authenticated without the recipient knowing personal information about us, right? And that's where something like self-sovereign identity, SSI, which is a blockchain technology, might play a role. And that's where perhaps, and you see cities experimenting with this. This is where SSI, identity management, we don't ever have to get concerned with crypto, and yet we're using the very best of blockchain technology. So I do think that's it's an important way of looking at the landscape right now.
I think actually, I'll just make this as a comment and let you lead us on. Is that the zero knowledge proofs? We talked about that at a separate event.
Yeah.
Which is that has some reassuring aspects to its potential to us, but the ability to build it in and make it a tool that is trustworthy and that we can maintain. Governments have to create systems and maintain them over decades, and that's our time horizon. We usually don't have the money and space to do things many times. So on Jonathan's point, that failure, we try to contain our failures. Our mayor used to say, fail fast, fail forward, but don't fail big. That's kind of our model. But I do think Jonathan mentioned something that does have a high potential use in cities, which is that zero knowledge. Technically, it's that type of math and the ability to use it in tech would open up a lot of avenues for us. And even for some of the security challenges on the horizon, but just want to make that point.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I also teach some like intro to blockchain workshops, and I'm even doing some like school outreach. And one of the first things that I do is ask people what they know. And cryptocurrency is almost always conflated with blockchain technology. And so kind of describing it as really more of like a low-hanging fruit application is usually new information for people, even if they have a little bit of experience in the space. But as we kind of think about the use cases that you are most excited about, I'd like to hear about maybe your framework for thinking about application, maybe what some of the barriers to adoption are, and kind of how you're thinking about that on a community scale.
Probably good start with Rob on this one.
Let me tell you about three. One was a partnership we actually had with Helium. And we said we want to continue to solve the digital divide issue. So in most urban communities, you see about 10% of the people lack consistent high-speed connectivity. And in COVID, you saw how that affects people's ability to get education, to work, to access healthcare, and literally hurts people. And so we had a couple different thrusts. We were building Wi-Fi networks, and as a partnership with our Eastside Union High School District, that now covers 170,000 people in Silicon Valley, working with Terragraph and Facebook on creating a new millimeter wave technology for high speed. But then one of the things we tried was with Helium. So if you can put a access point and people share their connectivity and they get coinage from that, so they get a cryptocurrency reward, that was worth a try because it solves a community problem. And on the point about fail fast, fail forward, was doing well. We never really saw the wide scale adoption that all sides hoped for. And when we decommissioned it, we said, really good lessons here, was absolutely worth the effort. Our maturity model, it did try to speak to, went right at a topical problem that is in the city's sphere of influence and control. So definitely the right type of experiment. And we still think there's space for that kind of thing. Another thing is for like the people who have food trucks, peddlers near sports events who get business licenses. The unbanked and underbanked is a problem, especially when you look at it from an equity lens. We really do think that blockchain and distributed ledger technologies generally have a space there where it can really unlock a lot of financial opportunity and ability for our small and mid-sized businesses. And we've seen potential lines of progress there, but I think it goes at kind of the third thing that I'll talk about is where we say we're going to see these technologies really take off. And we identified this at the end of 2016, 2017 is our blockchain strategic model is we need to see three things. We need to see that there's stability in whatever value and use there is. So if we pick something and it comes and goes, you can't build a civic solution around that. It does have to have some kind of stability. Number two is it needs to start being adopted by our vendor platforms. So when you want to pay us, you see that option. Oracle, PeopleSoft, Microsoft, the bigs are going to treat it as a viable option. And then it becomes something that we can train in, build, support over time. And then the last piece is some basic regulatory model where, kind of like banking, people need some minimum level of assurance that what they're working with is being watched, governed, checked, and they have some level of protection. Where that balance point is, I think, is still being worked out. But we said when we see those three things, then we'll know that the industry is at a point where we can really drive hard at it, because we'll have the basics on which we can create programs and maintain them and sustain them over time, and give our public the assurance that it's going to be reliable and last. But those two first areas are where we're willing to experiment, and that third area is where, when we see that, we'll be able to press the gas.
Yeah, it's really actually fabulous to see Rob and his team in San Jose exploring so many different ways of exploiting and trying out this technology. That's a very important quality in cities today. Not every city does that, by the way, around the world. They don't innovate as much as you might see in San Jose. So it's incredible to see that. And my guess, Rob, is you're learning a ton, right? And you're learning what works, what doesn't, and
we did learn a ton, yeah.
yeah, no doubt. You got to spend a bit of money. You got to make some mistakes. You got to fail a little bit. But that's, again, in a world where you've got to move fast on innovation, and cities have to be part of that. It comes with the territory. You got to have those. But you'll somewhere along the line, I think you'll find something that really solves a big issue, as you raise there. What is interesting to me is I look at the sort of use case world of blockchain, and I'm going to sort of focus just on blockchain for a moment explicitly. You see a lot of activity up until COVID. You see a lot of work being done up until 2019, even to early 2020. But COVID did slow the blockchain sort of ecosystem down quite a lot, particularly in the government and city context. And so cities are finally getting their mojo back, and things are starting to pick up again. So those projects, I guess, that were put on hold or slowed down may come to the forefront again. So that is definitely, I think, a characteristic of the environment we see. A lot of, as all of us know, certainly the three of us, there's a lot of opinions on these technologies. A lot of strong opinions where people are enthusiastic, and of course we have a lot of detractors, people who are just very much, in fact, to the point where they think there's nothing there, right? And so you have to figure out where do you want to, what do you think, as a either participant or an observer, where do you want to play? And so you look at the sort of the playing field, and you see a lot of work. When you look at industries and companies doing something with blockchain, it ranges from doing nothing. So that's a very small percentage. Then you get companies and organizations that are doing, they're learning. You get a lot that are experimenting, you get a lot that are piloting, and you get a small proportion that have production systems. So you do see this mix of where people are with blockchain experimentation. Some quick things that I like that I've seen in the government sector. I like what's been happening in Dubai in particular. Their ambition a few years ago was to run the entire city on blockchain, but they learned a lot in starting that, and they figure out what would work and what didn't. So there's a small amount of back-end systems now that have a blockchain component to it. Some of it supports their initiative, which they call it the paperless city. They want to basically eliminate to the best they can the use of paper. So they have some great use cases and real production systems around it. The other one is the country of Georgia, of all places, right, in the former Soviet Union, and now very much an independent country. And they had to start over when they became independent again. They really had a lot of issues, institutional issues, with just not having good paperwork and destroyed paperwork, and they had to kind of start over with a lot of things. And they decided that one thing they had to do was to have a really good database of real estate titles. That's titles that the government has to store. And they said, well, how are we going to do this? They had a chance, unlike most communities in the entire world, they had a chance to start from nothing, and they decided to build it on blockchain. And it continues to exist today. Very, very powerful, successful tool. Takes me to Estonia, who are very, very early on in distributed ledger use, going way back, and they continue to use it today. It's a part of their identity management systems. They call it Estonia. The whole country is sort of fairly digitally savvy. It's not the whole product in terms of how you log into systems and how you prove your identity and how you get that that international identity that they offer to everyone in the world. But it's a part of it, right? The last point, just bringing us to the US, is I'm now swinging over to crypto. Is Colorado accepting tax payments in crypto? So again, it's experimentation. It's a little novel. It creates a little bit of buzz, a little bit of branding. Are there major advantages? We have to see how it pans out. But at least they're saying let's try things. Let's try, and what will be the outcome of this, and will it stick, and what can others learn from it too? So there's more, but I'll pause there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited. I didn't know about some of those applications or experiments, as you put it. I really appreciate that. I would really be interested to see some experimentation in fiscal transparency for local governments using blockchain technology. I think that would go a long way in kind of promoting some of that civic trust. And one of the things that I think a lot of crypto projects have struggled with is in trying to build community, they lead with incentives, right? And of course, that kind of leads to some inflationary tokenomic disaster. And in a space where, governments already have a community, they already have constituents that they're there to serve. I'm curious about what applications you see being strongest for encouraging community input. I wonder if there's any experiment in mind about like incorporating some sort of DAO model where community members could really take an active role in community projects or things along those lines.
Mm-hmm. I have to. Yeah, but no, I unfortunately don't have a good answer. I don't know of a good example of that. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say. But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? It just means I don't know about it right now. Rob, do you see stuff like that?
Yeah. So where we've explored and tried to talk with some of the Web3 community and the venture capital companies is there are a couple spaces where there is high potential. Voting systems, absolutely one where, especially if you have that zero knowledge proof type of solution, people know they voted and it counted, and no one knows how they voted. That would be awfully useful in this current climate. In other situations, we've talked about attaching it to evidence and being able to manage kind of the evidentiary chain and the release of specific information to be very transparent to the public, but also to control what is rightly protected for legal or other reasons. And then from there, kind of the document management, clearances, that kind of stuff. There are a lot of maybe less sexy options that it could be applied to, but just on the front end where it kind of goes to that question of trust, that there are some situations. Fiscally, we've looked at how we might expose our books more through blockchain, and we haven't really seen anything that makes it more transparent or less transparent. We're pretty transparent by law, and so it didn't see any advantage there. But the trigger is where you want validation that your government did something properly or has a response, a vote, a payment from you and you can always prove it. Like that proof is in the receipt. The other thing I'll say, Ashley, is just on that kind of community work. Jonathan was a leader in innovation at Palo Alto, as well as we do have to coach companies. Is like one of the superpowers of people when they're startups is the ability to focus. Your narrow focus on something is tremendous, because once you get big enough, your fidelity goes widespread, and you can't really transform something as easily. It's like the innovator's dilemma, because you see different things, and that ability to focus is quite transformational. But that community of practice has to be able to say that we're not just giving you a niche solution. There's a proof of platform, not just a proof of a product or a solution. There's a reason why proof of solution is POS. And so if we can say that there's a platform that we can solve a problem, simplify problems, and create many solutions on, and train people in so they can stay current and actively use something, that obfuscation of complexity is what makes a community more effective with government and even large organizations, enterprise organizations. Has to be reliable. You have to be able to train in it. You have to be built in it. You can create lots of solutions and solve your problems at a better cost, more quickly. Then you have the whole game. And unfortunately, that's not what we see yet in blockchain.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up something, the point you made, Rob, about voting. I think that's an excellent topic to raise here, because the ultimate way that we participate and engage is through our voice. We vote, of course, when we buy things, but we vote in elections too. And I've always thought, based on my work and even the startups I've been able to advise or get visibility to, that that a great solution of blockchain in a local government context, even at a national level, actually, is the ability to vote. And blockchain is a good solution to this. The things that people fear, not having their vote counted, or stuff getting lost, or the integrity, the security, all these things, blockchain is potentially a good response to. But we have a bigger problem, though. And the reality is we're moving further away from electronic voting. People want to see more manual. The challenges that have occurred, or the appearance of challenges, has given people kind of hesitancy around electronic voting. We should all be voting on our smartphones today. Let's be clear, right? We should be. There's no technical reason why we can't do it, but we don't. We still use mail. We still go to places. We still have a lot of paperwork. Some communities don't permit it. There's just a lot of limitations, and we don't seem to be trending towards the electronic side. I've raised the issue a number of times, and I really get pushback. So the reason I raise this is you got a good problem, which is how do we ensure absolutely the best elections in the world, the most rigorous elections in the world, in terms of systems. You got the great problem, but we also have a solution. We have the potential of blockchain coupled with some other tech can really come to bear and solve that problem, and then bring it to our smartphones for those that want it. And boom, we have suddenly rigorous electronic voting. But the third challenge is people aren't ready for it, and people are not going to accept it in the short term. So we do have a journey there. Sometimes you have the problem and the solution, but people don't want to pursue it. So that I just think it's an important characteristic of the world in which we have to operate.
Actually, another one that came up during COVID was even getting married. And so Utah, of all places, took the leadership position, the county that has Salt Lake City, and they said, we're going to allow digital marriages. And they've actually been unlocking use cases for blockchain more than any other state that I've seen. So, for your list, we can introduce you to some of their leaders over there, but they've embraced it and said, there's low risk and it helps people do things that they need to do. Let's try.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, thank you for sharing that. And Utah's always been a leader in a lot of digital stuff, which is, at the state level. It's pretty impressive. I just wanted to cap something off on the voting thing. I think it's important to understand this. Using blockchain or electronic voting, for example, within organizations, is actually is embraced. And I just want to make the distinction. That's an area where we're kind of cool with it, and we can actually vote on our phones or vote in systems. that are provided by organizations, but we don't want to necessarily do it in our public life yet.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We definitely use, online voting, on-chain voting in a lot of different spaces, but I think maybe the perception for many people is that blockchain and government are adversaries, and that's probably a lot of the stories in the media are around crypto regulation, and so people kind of conflate the two. And I've definitely heard a lot of concern in adoption. Blockchain has the potential to really support autonomy and equity, but it also has the potential to be a mass surveillance tool. And so there's some confusion there about which direction it may go. So what are some things you might say to someone who has some reservations about signing on?
I'll actually say that, blockchain, especially on the crypto side, and the use of it to pay for things, to pay for illicit things, blockchain has been a great public safety policing tool.
Oh, didn't know where you were going with that.
Yeah, where they've been able to see who's paying for what has led to a lot of prosecutions and jail time of criminals. And so in some ways, they've validated the use case of responsible finance, because you can piece together. No one said blockchain is anonymous, right? You just have to tie the right information to certain transactions. And so I would say on one side of that actually is we're proving things out, and it's just, is it intentional or is it organic? And my assessment is right now it's still in that organic phase. And as we prove things out and we say, here are the problems we're trying to solve, and people get exposed to it in a harmless or wanted way, that opens them up to broader scale use. And then we'll see if it has kind of a high into the right curve at some point when the partners, the technology, and the regulation is there so that the adoption can take off, especially once you get enterprise vendors start using it. That to me is when you'll really start to see things flare.
Yeah, great points. I wanted to add sort of a different angle to your question. And I experienced this in the private sector, but I experienced it a lot in the public sector when I worked there, which was, particularly, maybe it's a Silicon Valley thing, but a lot of startups and tech organizations sometimes lead with tech. They come into a city manager's office, or in the case of Rob, maybe a deputy city manager, and they say, we got a blockchain-based AI solution for you, right?
It's the best in the world.
It's the best in the world. What city managers and deputy city managers and CIs want to hear, they want to hear, we have a solution that can reduce bicycle accidents for kids. That's a much better starting point. I'm probably like a broken record on this. It's a point I've been sharing with the startup community a lot. If you lead with the blockchain, right away you're establishing in the mind of the listener or the buyer a bias, because they either are in love with the tech or they have a perception that it's bad, and so you've kind of lost them. It's very important, if you're coming with a new solution, is to talk about the problem you're solving. And for us three here, we this is the world we operate in. But a lot of the communities of innovators who they have a great idea built on some very innovative tech, and they want to bring it to a city, and they're like, this is cool, But you've got to be able to sell the solution to the problem. And then there's an opportunity at some point to say, you know what, we couldn't solve it with centralized tech. We tried our best. For decades, it was unsolvable with centralized tech, but we figured out a way to solve it with decentralized technology. And we're using the following blockchain with the following crypto, the ecosystem of technologies within that world. And that becomes interesting later on. And people are sort of like, wow, that's incredible how you solved it. So, a little bit, I guess not the most profound thought in the world, but this idea that, if you're leading with the tech, maybe you're losing your audience a little bit. Let's lead with the problems and the solutions, right?
Yeah, actually, let me throw one more out at you, because
Sure.
Jonathan inspired two other thoughts. One is, for example, the homelessness problem that we're having in so many urban communities, even to the suburban today. And what COVID seemed to have accelerated, wealth disparities, where that exists, you see acceleration as well. But it's really hard to solve the problem. In some cases, we do what we call abatement. You call us, we fix it, we're done. With homelessness, with food insecurity and housing insecurity, we often get into a management situation where there's a problem that doesn't go away easily. And then we spend a lot of resources just chasing it, cleaning up areas, policing activity. But blockchain does have the potential where if we can manage to the person, but also protect their identity, we can actually say, we're going to get you supportive services. We know who your parole officer is potentially, or you're getting medical services elsewhere. And we know how to better respond to you and to keep that alignment there to get you out of situations that are causing you and others harm. It's hard, terrifically hard, almost impossible to do right now. And counties have their HMIS systems, and they're going to protect those because of privacy laws and rules. Absolutely the right thing to do. But if we're really shooting at the better outcome, we're going to align cities and counties and nonprofits and law enforcement and state agencies all around the person and the care that they need to be in a better place, that those social ills are more completely and consistently addressed. Another is in education. It's really hard for us right now to say what worked in education and what didn't, because when people move their identity, different schools, different addresses, you can't really track them. And then there's laws, FERPA, Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, where you can't even share some of that information. So how can we be effective with government programs? And I think those are the cases where if you step into it and you have high responsibility and those providers are willing to lean in, and we're going to experiment, to go back to Jonathan's earlier points, if you show effectiveness and we prove that out at scale, then the technology looks a lot more viable. And then the layer 3 solutions actually can accelerate, and they can kind of build where there are gaps and help us fill those. But fundamentally, at least we have a conversation to keep taking us forward.
That's such a great point. And that's, it's such an important problem to solve. So all ideas are embraced. We got to look at every way to solve these unhoused issues. Very, 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 very nasty.
Yeah, even Palo Alto has some.
Yeah. Right.
I appreciate both your perspectives on that front. One of the things that I do with the nonprofit that I work with is teach people about blockchain, but then also about what it looks like to start their own business in Web3. And one of the first conversations we have to have is like a basic needs assessment, as if you were applying for a grant when you're looking for investors. You have to make it very clear what the problem is and how your solution is the solution. And that's a step that I think many of us miss when we get really excited about, look at this cool thing that I made. So thank you for that. I want to ask one more question before I open it up to James to see if he has anything he'd like to ask. But I just want to see if there are any developments or areas of interest that you're most excited about in blockchain moving forward, or things that you are really hopeful for in the coming years.
I'm happy to throw out a few. Again, I write about these extensively in my new book called Cryptocurrency Quick Start Guide,
which we will link in the show notes.
Thank you so much. That's very kind. Shameless plugging. Terrible person. I'm a terrible person. But no, I'm an educator. I'm not an evangelist. I want people to learn, and to everything we've talked about in these last 50 minutes or so. The more knowledge we have, the more insights, the more helpful we can be, and the more innovative we can be. So I'm kind of on an education mission more than anything else. I think, I talked about self-sovereign identity earlier. I think the identity management piece of blockchain is very compelling. I think that's one that I'm looking forward to seeing how that can mature over the weeks, months, and years ahead. Although this doesn't sound like something I'm looking forward to, I do think the sort of upcoming regulation is a good thing. It goes against some of the spirit of the early days of crypto and blockchain. I get that, because I get the community. But if we want to see the kind of maturity that propels the uses, and even something like seeing crypto stabilize and be more seriously considered by broader audiences, although it's used by 420 million people around the world. So it's not a small thing. People need protections. The SEC in the United States, for example, needs to have the ability to protect individuals, and that'll just be, I think, in the medium to long term, a good thing. I really do think that's a good thing. And I think lastly, is DeFi, right? Decentralized finance. Of all the industries sort of showing real solutions, DeFi actually is working really well. Rob actually very early on in his comments talked about the unbanked. What a great point. And it is amazing to think that there's a lot of unbanked in San Jose, and there's even businesses that are unbanked. There's a whole range of reasons why people can't use banks or get, applications submitted. It's scary at a global level. It's hundreds of millions of people. But if we just go local here, it's interesting to hear that. And so just being able to say, hey, you know what? This alternative to the global financial system can provide more entry points for people to have financial services so they can be full participants in the global economy or even the local economy. No one's going to argue that's a bad thing, I hope. So that does seem like a very positive. And it's not like this is sort of like very experimental. We're seeing real solutions by real companies and real startups making inroads. So I'm pretty pumped up about the potential for DeFi.
And I think Jonathan and I are seeing it very similarly, just maybe from a slightly different lens. But the number one, the consolidation phase, I think that we're entering in. Every new technologies, you have a lot of people who kind of scatter at it when it first comes out. You had kind of a COVID interrupt, but I do see some consolidation of the think and the approaches to blockchain, and I think that's a good thing because the logic, the mind share seems to be coalescing to a point where we can have concerted direction on some pretty big questions. Number two, I think as people prove out that zero-based knowledge type math and inclusion in blockchain, that is actually going to be a transformational feature that we don't have elsewhere. And so it's a natural fit. And you have some really smart, industrious entrepreneurs working on that. But I think that opens up elections. It opens up records management. And in the world of privacy and even rights, digital rights, I think distributed ledger and blockchain have a place there that it can solve some problems, like even what you use to create some of this generative AI, what components you use, who owns some of those rights, that it could help solve some of those problems. But then the third thing, exactly as Jonathan was talking about, is that regulation piece. I think we have enough experiments under our belt where we can be wise enough to do entry level regulation. And we have a term now is you have the unbanked, the underbanked. They can't get enough credit. They can't get enough access. They get feed to death. We now have the debanked because we have additional failures. And seeing the path of that and how to address and what your problem level is, you could come up with different solutions than wholesale bank purchases or takeover by FDIC. You could narrow in on whose accounts and where your problems are a little bit better to manage your portfolio. Maybe some of that would have been more obvious, even though quite a few people saw it coming. But I think that space is ripe for that base regulation that gives people the assurance that something's going to be stable, something's going to be supported. I'm going to have a minimum amount of protection that I can start leaning in. But that's where governments are going to look, right? We're going to say, how can we solve problems and give people a trusted platform and be proficient ourselves at it so that we can sustain it over time.
That's excellent. And I just wanted to, did want to add one more thing because I would be remiss if I didn't. The way that you asked the question was sort of what are we excited about? I kind of thought a bit more shorter term. If we go out a little bit more longer term, the notion of within Web3 that people may have more control over their data, right? That it does become decentralized. I think the promise of that is very compelling, and I'm excited to see where we go and what form that takes. So didn't want to lose sight that Web3 proposes a new internet, that kind of breaks up the monopolies, right? And the ability then for us to each have more agency over our data, to monetize it, to keep it private, all that sort of stuff. I think is something we got to keep our eye on. It's early, but it's promising, right?
Yeah, and I have to apologize. Layer 2, I think you guys are going to have, like Metis and others, going to have definite place how to accelerate that as soon as it's created, because the scale of that data we've not dealt with before practically. But literally, I'm not kidding. There's a layer 3 on how do you manage that and have some kind of regulated approach at that. So even though I just threw out a new term, I want to be clear what I meant by that. I'm not just trying to make up stuff to confuse people.
Yeah, if anyone's interested in learning more, I recently released an episode called Why Decentralized Identities Matter. And we talked with Disco and Nuvo, which are 2 projects that are working on decentralized identities and data ownership. So really interesting segue into that if anybody wants to learn more. Fantastic. I feel like we could talk for a really long time, but I want to be respectful of everyone. Thank you guys so much for what you've shared so far. I'm going to invite James into the stream now. James, you ready? All right. Hi. How's it
going? Hi. Good to meet you all. Rob,
hey, James,
and Ashley. I appreciate you guys having me on. So I wanted to. I have questions for both of you, but I wanted to start with Rob, if that is okay. Just because of like the city conversation and merging that with blockchain. So Rob, I wanted to ask you if you could describe the unbanked problem a little bit more in a little bit more detail in San Jose.
Sure.
Why are there people that are unbanked, and how would the blockchain address that?
Sure. So just to kind of give you 2 background data points. Silicon Valley is 40+% immigrant. And it's been a successful model for us over time. But that wealth doesn't mean everyone's wealthy. And so you have 2 nuances to both of those things. Not everyone is documented. And when you're not documented, how do you go buy groceries, establish a savings account, pay for certain bills where they say it's digital only? If you have a paycheck, I need direct deposit. You run to a series of life challenges that for everyone else isn't there. And it causes you stress, but it also causes you an inability to interact transactionally with the modern economy. Sometimes you see it in business, like the cannabis industry still has immense difficulties managing their money other than in cash because of some federal interpretations of law and where they're allowed to bank and where they're not. So you literally have millions of dollars of cash transactions being a kind of physical. And then also when people get into credit issues, which tends to be equity neighborhoods, people in poverty, they'll get the fees and the charges and the penalties at a much higher rate than your middle income folks and your upper income folks. And that sends them, it's kind of like a double tax. It sends them further into the spiral. So on the unbanked, I can't access the modern digital economy. And the underbanked, I can't get credit. I can barely keep an account open, and I'm paying a lot of penalties for not being richer. Right. And that hurts our high equity and high poverty neighborhoods because it keeps them there. The data is very clear. And you can look in any system, basically a similar pattern. If it's education, if it's employment, you see certain incomes and certain ethnic and racial breakdowns consistently. That's a systemic problem. But also on the business side, how do you have a successful small business grow if they can't have access to credit and the ability to pay people effectively and that kind of construct? So the decentralized finance has that promise of not making you go through large institutional banking and opening up the economic power that is a very significant 10, 15% of our economy of these super small businesses and these individuals who are struggling to get by.
Yeah. And is it also kind of just hard to verify who is having these problems? Because, you mentioned that it's a lot of undocumented immigrants. So
not a lot. That's part of our equation, but I don't want to distort the picture. So that is a factor with undocumented status and the ability to get banks, but you have other situations that come up too.
Yeah.
So it is hard and it's not hard.
Okay.
Can we see the whole picture? That is a little more difficult, but we see it every day on the first and second floor because people come in trying to pay like a building permit in cash. Or we'll hear from council members when we're doing our banking RFP for banking services for the city, $6-7 billion city, big bank accounts.
Right.
But our council members will approach us and say, hey, we're dealing with these small businesses in our districts, and they're struggling to do business with the city because they don't have those accounts that other people have. So what can we do to have maybe a community bank that creates more opportunity for folks, or decentralized finance options like Mochify and others who have tried to move that space to be more accessible?
Okay. Interesting. And then I also wanted to just get an answer on elections from you, because I know Jonathan mentioned this, and as soon as somebody in the call mentioned voting, I was going to ask this, but Jonathan kind of went into this a little more. Do you actually see a future where people are voting in elections through blockchain technology, at least in cities, maybe federally?
Jonathan, go first. You know this well.
Who's that for? Is that for Rob or myself?
I mean, I was asking Rob because I wanted to see what his perspective is on it.
Sure.
But yeah, it could be to both of you.
I'll throw 2 points out, but Jonathan definitely does have more knowledge on this, I think. I think yes. And I think you'll see those adoptions of voting technologies happen at the local level first. That's actually the national history. 40-hour work week, worker rights, protections, work comp protections. Those usually start at the local level and then work their way up to state and get adopted by federal. I think the same pattern is going to happen with blockchain-driven voting. Is we have to prove it at a small scale where people get comfortable with it, because the national conversation basically had to go to, I need paper to prove it. That's truth. And it actually isn't, but it gives at least a reassurance. So point one is I think it will happen local, and two, absolutely, I think it will happen, just a matter of when and how.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that. It's a great answer. I would just say maybe like who's going to make it happen. It's going to be probably happen at the state, and well, of course, our elections are governed by at the state level. I suppose that's it'll be a governor. It'll be some governor who has the guts and the energy to push the idea. And once it works in one state, another state will try it. And I don't think it's soon, though. Maybe that's where we might differ. As Rob says, maybe there's some like a school district election or something, or a sheriff election. Some small elections will start to use some of these things, but where it really matters is when the big elections, right? The city, the and then the federal
All-Star game. Who gets to host the Soccer World Cup? Right. Then people will be like, "Oh yeah, I'm ready for
it." and this would require a change in the law, right, to allow blockchain to be used as a potential means to vote, right? I mean,
it's going to be differing by some states, because state and local elections are the purview legally of states. Federal election is for federal law for federal elections. So it's actually 2 layers of law, and maybe even the local level. But that's not insurmountable once one agency figures it out. Kind of like the example I gave with Amelia Gardner's leadership in Utah. When people were like, "You can't get married online," and Amelia and their clerk said, "Well, you know what? Watch us." And then once you figure it out, people say, "How did you do it? How did you change your rules, your laws, your processes? How do you validate records?" and that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden it becomes possible. But I agree with Jonathan. I'm always bad about predicting timing. We usually get the pattern right. It's just the speed. Just as a joke, last November, I was at a event and saying, Google's got some problems on its hands, because I was playing with Instruct GPT and DALL-E. I think Google's search is in 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years, going to be in trouble. It happened in March. It was literally 2 months later. So I'm always wrong on time, but usually we can get the pattern right.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm not in the business of making predictions either. I just report what people say, and that's enough for me. And then Jonathan, I also wanted to get to you also, because I felt that point about the self-sovereign identity system is very interesting, and I wanted to ask you more about how it could be used in city government services and in other contexts.
Well, thanks for the question.
Sure.
I mean, it is a replacement potentially for the broader area of identity and access management.
Mhm.
I mean, the challenges we have today, just to kind of lay it out, is we don't really have what's called single sign-on in government. It's certainly not pervasive. There maybe Estonia is the one exception, and they kind of built it in the 1990s. That was that was their architectural principle, and we're going to maintain that. And they had the opportunity. Mostly, you're logging into different systems. The systems look different. They behave differently. They have different owners. And it's just a pain.
You're just talking about like different city or like government services. Like, is that what you're talking about when you say?
Yeah. So, if you deal with if you, for example, need to log in to update your address on your driver's license, and you log in online, or you're paying taxes online, or any number of the thousands of services any of us need to do with local, state, and federal government, you're logging into something.
Right.
And by the way, there is the ID.me at the federal level, but it's not used by everybody. There are attempts to, there are some good ideas. What distinguishes the potential for self-sovereign identity in the government context is you just have to basically say, hey, we're going to conform and authenticate against that. That's one thing. So it's kind of easy to do that once we establish a standard, or we say that's the provider we're going to go with. But the second part, which is really neat, and this is not the case with most identity management systems, as the user who's presenting their credentials or trying to get access, you don't actually need to send any information to the person who's requesting it. So you can imagine this is a horrible situation, but you're speeding or something, or you went through a red light, and so a cop stops you and takes you to the side of the road. They want to see your driver's license. They take your driver's license and they walk back to their their motorcycle. I don't know what they're doing over there, but they spend 10 minutes over there doing.
Maybe in Amsterdam.
Yeah. That's right. They should be on bicycles. We all should be on bicycles, right? And then they walk back to you, and you're getting a fine, or you're being let go, whatever. But during all of that time, your identity was out of your hands. The cop had access to your address. They entered your information. So you've lost control of your identity, right? And that's just one of, again, thousands of these interactions. In a properly implemented SSI environment, the cop can take, a barcode, or QR code, and he or she never sees the information, authenticates against this blockchain environment that's been used, and comes back and says, yes, this person is who they say they are, and then you go on. So you got the authentication, and you have the lack of the lack of necessity to share personal information. And for those two reasons, it's a winner if it can be embraced.
Yeah, no, interesting. I hadn't thought of it being used in traffic stops, so that's a interesting example.
You bet.
Hey guys, I apologize. I have to head off to my next meeting. They're pinging me. Anything else you need, Ashley or James?
I think I'm good. I mean, I could ask a million questions, but honestly, I think I got enough. So I appreciate both of you, and just being very candid.
Rob has a lot of different things he manages, including the airport in San Jose, and we don't want anything to be in the way of him managing one of the most busiest important airports in the country. So you should go and do that.
Yeah, totally. Planes take off and land, so everything over there is good. All right. Thanks all.
So much, Rob. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Great to see you, Rob.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Okay.
Did you have any more questions for Jonathan, James?
Looking. I did want. I could ask you about. I wanted to go back to the thing about Dubai.
Sure.
Because I don't know. I didn't quite get what their use cases are for blockchain? Was it just about having kind of a paperless city? Was that the idea?
Well, it's shifted over time. It's important. Thank you for wanting to clarify it. So early on, so that, one of the things that is characteristic of Dubai in particular is, they've defined their new brand as embracing innovation, embracing emerging technologies, to be a leading city in the world. And, it's kind of working because they're now the most popular destination in the world. And, it's a very digital city, very connected city. So when something like blockchain comes along and crypto comes along, their leadership immediately wants to know, how can we be the first? How can we break ground on this? How can we innovate? How can we show the possible, the art of the possible? So they do that as a matter of habit. And I'm glad they do it. I'm glad that there's a kind of a role model in the world ready to take the risks that others are not ready to take. So they said, we're going all in. They're not about half measures. And they said, we're going to convert the entire local government in terms of our systems and the back-end systems into decentralized systems using blockchain. And so the leadership said, let's go. Well, wanting to do it and actually executing on it are often different things.
Yeah.
And they did have some success. They also learned how hard it was and how blockchain this is a few years ago, wasn't ready. There was a lot of moving pieces. Crypto was showing that it had these fluctuations between being strong and then being weak and strong. So that volatility was making people a bit nervous. So they did downsize that effort a lot. Sometime close to that, they did announce that with their desire to want to become a leading digital city in the world, they wanted to reduce all of the paperwork, all the bureaucracy, and literally reduce the paper so that they weren't consuming. It was a sustainability initiative more than anything. So they weren't, having for every transaction printing receipts and forcing people to print documents and mail documents and bring documents to places, but make it all digital. And they've made fabulous progress. I mean, really a big percentage of their government services now are 100% digital. The degree to which they do run blockchain on the back end is not a number that I know today, and I don't know if they're public about it. But they certainly tied in that technology where it made sense alongside their paperless initiative.
All right, interesting. Yeah, I think I got through everything, but I will certainly I don't know if I have everybody's contact, but
you can reach out to Kat if you need more stuff and more information and have any other questions.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks so much for joining, James.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Jonathan, thank you. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure to get to chat with you and to meet you. And I look forward to checking out your book and learning more from you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.